Chapter 13:24. Of the two people who walked into the hall, the elder appeared extremely old. His hair and beard were all white, and the wrinkles on his face almost covered his eyes. His body was as hunched as a shrimp. However, when everyone saw him appear, their eyes revealed a trace of respect, and their bodies slightly leaned forward to show their respect. Needless to say, Chu Xiu knew that this old man was the initiator of the ancient Venerate conference. He was also the oldest primordial god Hua Qingshan among the present primordial gods. Before coming here, Chu Xiu had inquired about Hua Qingshan's information, but it was not much. That was because the primordial god Hua Qingshan kept a very low profile. He rarely came out of the Jianghu and did not participate in the Jianghu's disputes, even among the primordial gods. Every time the ancient Venerate conference was held, the primordial god Hua Qingshan's attitude was very fair and impartial. After a long time, he naturally won the respect of many primordial gods. At least when facing such an old man, one would not feel any hostility toward him. Of course, it was useless even if one felt hostility toward him. The old man in front of him, who looked so old and frail as if he was on the verge of death, was a genuine expert of the ninth heaven of martial immortal realm. He stood at the pinnacle of the exalted major, and was comparable to the Tao ancestors. He was also the face of the primeval sovereigns. Chu Xiu felt that he could not resist the power of the primordial god Hua Qingshan's attack, just now even if he used all his trump cards. Everyone present had a strange look in their eyes when they saw the young man behind Hua Qingshan. Chu Xiu also noticed the young man. He was dressed like a Taoist priest and wore an extremely gorgeous Taoist robe with star patterns. It turned out to be a rare treasure with the starlight power on it, as if a galaxy had been refined into it. His aura was not weaker than Hua Qingshan's, but it was extremely reserved. However, there was not the slightest emotion in his eyes, only a boundless galaxy, profound vicissitudes and unfathomable. Hua Qingshan walked to Chu Xiu's side, paused for a moment, then grinned and said, "Not bad, young man. We prime sovereigns have been living in seclusion, but in reality, we have also lost our drive, so there are very few young people who can stand out. You have made a name for yourself in the outside world, and represent the entire prime sovereign lineage. Not bad." Chu Xiu bowed his head and said, "Senior is overpraising me." The young Taoist priest also glanced at Chu Xiu. However, there was a boundless galaxy revolving around his eyes, and there was no change in his expression. There was only a trace of a gentle smile that seemed to never change, making it impossible for others to guess what he was thinking. Hua Qingshan then turned his gaze towards Su Tianya, shook his head and said, "You martial artists of the dragon subduing divine general's lineage are always so hot-tempered. Actually, upon reaching the martial immortal realm, your control over the power of your cultivation techniques has reached the pinnacle. Your cultivation techniques will no longer affect your state of mind. The ones that will affect your state of mind will be yourselves. Dragons could soar above the 9 heavens, and they could also hide in the 9 abyss. I was there before your master passed away, and he told me that the dragon subduing divine general and the dragon subduing divine general are not referring to your cultivation techniques, but yourself. When you can subdue this dragon in your heart, then you will be considered complete." Su Tianya did not dare to refute. He hurriedly cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your guidance, Supreme Divinity." Hua Qingshan then turned his gaze to Feng Baidu. "Your lineage of Venerable Guyu and the dragon subduing divine general's lineage complement each other, but I hope that you can complement each other not only in cultivation techniques, but also in character. Sharing life and death is commendable, but you must also remember that you should not allow one party to act impulsively, while you accompany him in acting impulsively." Feng Baidu lowered his head obediently and said, "Thank you for your guidance, Supreme Divinity." Hua Qingshan slowly walked forward, and sat on the main seat. He said in a deep voice, "Everyone, there are actually 2 things that I would like to inform everyone of in this ancient venerable meeting. The first is that there is a problem with the formation seal between the lower realm and the Dalu Ocean. The formation seal in the lower realm has disappeared, and it won't be long before the lower realm and the Dalu Ocean are completely connected." Upon hearing this, the crowd was stunned for a moment, then began to whisper and discuss excitedly. After a while, when everyone's voices had quieted down, Hua Qingshan continued, I'm sure everyone is aware of the impact of this matter, so I won't say more. We have not returned to the ancestral land for 10,000 years, and we do not know what is in the ancestral land in the lower realm. It may be dangerous, but it could also be an opportunity. Not all of us from the ancient venerable lineage want to stay in the mountains and forests to cultivate. I know this. Therefore, if we can return to the ancestral land this time, the major Daluotian sects have promised us that we can establish a sect at will. They will not stop us and will even support us. The interests of the 4 Daluotian regions are already fixed. If we establish a sect, we will invade their interests and snatch food from the mouths of the top sections. They will not agree, but in the ancestral land in the lower realm, there are not so many rules. The ancient venerables were taken aback by these words, then fell silent again. Everyone's eyes were filled with contemplation. Establish a sect? It wasn't that no ancient venerable had ever thought of this, but very few had actually done it. For them, establishing a top sect was equivalent to snatching food from the mouths of the top sects of the other 4 regions. There was bound to be a fight. Establishing a small sect was meaningless to them. It was better to be a virtuous ancient venerable and focus all their energy and resources on passing down their legacies. With the opportunity to enter the lower realm and the promise of the top sects, the ancient venerable lineages were worthy of careful consideration. To the side, Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes in thought, but what he was thinking about was what would happen after the upper and lower realms were connected. Chu Xiu had been unaware of the Daluotian's reaction. But now, it seemed that the Daluotian side hadn't made any unnecessary moves, and had instead chosen to cautiously wait for the formation to collapse on its own in order to preserve the exalted divine palace. After all, the exalted divine palace had been built 10,000 years ago by gathering the power of all the cultivators of the lower realms. Even though the ceiling formation had been destroyed, the exalted divine palace was still intact and could still be used for cultivation. Moreover, if anything happened to the lower realm, the Daluotian sects could rebuild the formation with the exalted divine palace as the center. After everyone had digested this information, Hua Qingshan continued. As for the second matter, it is an internal affair of the ancient venerables. I'm old and have presided over several ancient venerables' conventions. When my disciple died in an accident, it took me a long time to find Xiaoyao to be my disciple. Therefore, I don't have the time or energy to manage the affairs of the ancient venerables' lineage. I recommend Xinghe to be the next organizer of the ancient venerables' conventions, and the leading figure of the ancient venerables' lineage. With that, Hua Qingshan pointed to the young Taoist sitting to his right. His words stirred a commotion among the crowd, and there were all sorts of words of persuasion and persuasion. Chu Xiu's expression changed drastically. He'd had his suspicions before, but now he was certain that the young Taoist was Xinghe unfettered, Meng Xinghe, the renowned ancient venerables of the outside world. Chu Xiu had no grudge against Meng Xinghe, but he did have a grudge against Yi Weikong of Frigid River City. Previously, Chu Xiu had schemed against Yi Weikong and severely injured him. Therefore, Chu Xiu could vaguely guess Meng Xinghe's attitude towards him. However, Meng Xinghe was much stronger than Yi Weikong. Both of them were several hundred years old. Although Yi Weikong hadn't entered his twilight years, his vitality was no longer increasing. Meng Xinghe, on the other hand, was still able to maintain his youthful appearance. This wasn't the result of using some secret technique, but the abnormally rich vitality in his body. What Meng Xinghe was displaying now was his true age. According to his overall lifespan, Meng Xinghe was currently in the prime of his life. Hua Qingshan couldn't help but shake his head when he saw the crowd urging him to stay. Everyone, I've made up my mind. I really don't want to sit in this position anymore. Xinghe is already a peak expert of the 9th heaven of martial immortal. Even if I go all out, I'm still no match for him. With him representing us, Gu Zun's bloodline, we'll have more confidence when talking to those from the major sections. This time, when the lower realms formation was destroyed, Xinghe represented me in the discussion with the top experts of the major sections. Now that he's sitting in this position, he deserves it. Among the Daluotian people, the 9th heaven of martial immortal represented an expert that stood at the absolute peak. There were less than 10 such existences in the entire Daoyu Ocean. There were Taoist sects, Buddhist sects, and sword sections. If Gu Zun's bloodline wanted to talk to them on equal terms, they naturally needed an expert like that. This person used to be Hua Qingshan, and now it was Meng Xinghe. With Hua Qingshan's recommendation and Meng Xinghe's strength, no one present objected. They couldn't find any reason to. Hua Qingshan casually waved his hand and said, "All right, that's all I want to say. Everyone, please feel free to trade as you please." One of the highlights of the ancient sovereign convention was when the prime sovereigns casually traded cultivation techniques, items, and discussed martial arts. This segment was relatively peaceful. However, Chu Xiu's side was very quiet. Most people cast strange glances at Chu Xiu, but no one went over. For Chu Xiu, there were only two kinds of people present. One was those who had a grudge against him, and the other was someone he didn't know. Needless to say, the other prime sovereigns didn't know Chu Xiu well either. They didn't have any friendship with him, so what was there to trade with? Moreover, it was rumored that Chu Xiu was ruthless and ruthless. He had killed 3 prime sovereigns' successors in a row. Such rumors naturally made people stay away from him. However, at that moment, a black-clothed burly man walked toward Chu Xiu. Chapter 13:25. The burly man who suddenly walked towards Chu Xiu was about as strong as Chu Xiu, a 4th firmament martial immortal. The burly man smiled and said, "I am Qi Lianhai, a descendant of the vacant mountain demon Venerable." Chu Xiu cupped his fists and said, "So it's Brother Qi. However, you still dare to approach me in such a situation?" Qi Lianhai glanced at Su Tianya and the others and said, "Why not? I'm not afraid of Su Tianya and Fang Baidu. Moreover, I've long disliked these 2 fellows. They aren't very strong, so they will team up and fight with numbers. Don't you think it's disgusting for 2 grown men to be together all day long? Besides, I have to thank you, Brother Chu, for helping me take revenge for my sect." Chu Xiu was surprised and said, "Oh, I helped you take revenge for your sect. May I ask who your sect's enemy is?" Qi Lianhai sneered and said, "It's the Bliss Demon Palace. In fact, my lineage was originally from the Blissful Demon Palace, but due to the difference in cultivation methods and ideologies, we were suppressed by the former palace lord of the Blissful Demon Palace. Left with no choice, we could only leave the Blissful Demon Palace and become a rogue cultivator. To put it nicely, my bloodline is also a prime venerable, but in reality, we are just stray dogs. It's a pity that the Blissful Devil Palace has always been a major Devil Dao sect in the southern region. Even if my bloodline wanted to take revenge, they couldn't find a way to do so. Luckily, Brother Chu, you helped us take revenge." Chu Xiu nodded and said, "No need to be so polite, Brother Qi. Why did you come to me this time?" Chu Xiu wasn't naive enough to think that Qi Lianhai came to him just to thank him. It had been a long time since he destroyed the Bliss Demon Palace. Why hadn't he seen anyone come to him to thank him? Qi Lianhai disregarded everyone else's opinions and rushed to get close to him. He must have some ulterior motive. Qi Lianhai waved his hand and said, "In that case, I won't waste any more time. I came to you to trade a portion of the Bliss Demon Palace's cultivation techniques. After the Blissful Devil Palace was destroyed, these things should have fallen into the hands of Brother Chu and the Heavenly Devil Palace. However, if I were to go to the Heavenly Devil Palace with my identity, even if my bloodline has a grudge against the Blissful Devil Palace, the Heavenly Devil Palace might not believe me. Therefore, I can only come to you, Brother Chu. As for the items to be traded, I believe Brother Chu will need them." "What is it?" Qi Lianhai said solemnly. "Heavenly Demon Creation Scripture. In the past, my ancestor had a falling out with the Blissful Demon Palace's palace lord, because my ancestor was going to look for the Blissful Demon Palace's Devil Dao of Creation. But back then everyone in the Bliss Demon Palace had already given up on the Creation Demon Dao, and walked on the path that they thought was correct. Instead, they labeled my ancestral master as a heretic. When I saw Brother Chu attack Baidu just now, you used the power of the Fortune Heavenly Devil. Brother Chu, you must have obtained it from the Blissful Devil Palace, right? The power of the Fortune Heavenly Devil is the ultimate power that can reach the pinnacle of the Great Tao. However, it is too obscure, difficult to understand, and extremely difficult to cultivate. Even though I have reached the martial immortal realm, I dare not say that I have comprehended the power of the fortune heavenly devil. The heavenly demon creation scripture is my ancestors' understanding of the power of the fortune heavenly devil. I believe it will be very useful to Brother Chu. After listening, Chu Xiu didn't even think about it before nodding and saying, yes. Chu Xiu had great confidence in the power of the fortune heavenly devil. Although his understanding of the power could only be regarded as rudimentary, if he could truly master it, the power of the fortune heavenly devil could help him reach the pinnacle of the demonic Tao. After the smooth exchange, Qi Lianhai glanced to the side and suddenly whispered to Chu Xiu, Brother Chu, you're a straightforward person and a rare demonic cultivator among the prime sovereigns. You and I can be considered to walk the same path. I have to remind you of one thing. Be careful of one person. Who? Meng Xinghe. Qi Lianhai's voice sounded a little sad. The primordial ultimate god was the leader of the ancient sovereign bloodline. Although he didn't do anything beneficial to the ancient sovereign bloodline, he was always fair and didn't harm anyone's interests. That's why we admire him. However, things are a little complicated with Meng Xinghe. I've dealt with him before, and he's definitely not as simple as he appears to be. I just hope he doesn't bring the entire ancient sovereign bloodline into the abyss. Brother Chu, I've heard about your dispute with Cold River City in the Eastern Territory. The friendship between Meng Xinghe and Yi Weikong is definitely beyond your imagination. Now that he has become the leader of the ancient sovereign bloodline, Brother Chu, you'd better be careful. Qi Lianhai had just finished speaking when Meng Xinghe suddenly walked towards them, causing Qi Lianhai's expression to change slightly. He had just used the power of laws to transmit his voice. Unless the other party had comprehended the same power of laws, they shouldn't have been able to hear it. Qi Lianhai secretly blamed himself for talking too much. He immediately bade farewell to Chu Xiu and turned to leave. Chu Xiu looked at Qi Lianhai in a slightly astonished manner. Exactly what did Meng Xinghe do back then for this fourth-level martial immortal expert to be so afraid? Meng Xinghe walked up to Chu Xiu with a faint smile on his face and said in a gentle voice, Chu, I've heard a lot about you. Chu Xiu said indifferently, what Wanderer Meng heard should be cursing me, right? Meng Xinghe laughed and said, I can feel that you're a little hostile towards me, Chu. Is it because of Yi Weikong? I built Cold River City with Yi Weikong in the past, but Cold River City doesn't belong to me. I'm Xinghe Wanderer, not the Lord of Cold River City. From the day I chose to leave Cold River City and became a prime sovereign, I actually had nothing to do with Cold River City. If I still wanted to help Cold River City, then it wouldn't be High Heaven Sect but Cold River City that dominates the Eastern Territory now. With that said, Meng Xinghe glanced at Chu Xiu and said, You may think I'm boasting, but I never like to boast. No one in High Heaven Sect can stop me, even if they use the High Heaven Wuji seal. Meng Xinghe's words didn't contain much conceit. There was only self-confidence, extreme self-confidence. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, So even if I schemed against Cold River City and Yi Weikong was seriously injured, Wanderer Meng won't vent his anger on me? Meng Xinghe shook his head and said, Of course not. It's not necessary. Yi Weikong is very stubborn, and I'm also very stubborn. He has his path, and I have mine. If I interfere in his affairs, it's equivalent to deviating from the path I chose. Similarly, Yi Weikong understood me and understood me. He had never come to look for me after so many years. Now you are a prime sovereign, and I am also a prime sovereign. What we should talk about shouldn't be the matters of the underworld, but the matters between us prime sovereigns. Oh, what does Wanderer Meng want to talk about? Although I'm not the weakest among all the prime sovereigns present, I'm not the strongest either. My seniority is also the lowest. Meng Xinghe said in a deep voice, Chu, you cultivate Taoism, Buddhism, and demonic Tao at the same time. What do you think about sectarian bias? Chu Xiu was a little confused by Meng Xinghe's words. Sectarian bias? This was something all cultivators knew. Why did Meng Xinghe ask this? Chu Xiu thought about it and said, The so-called sectarian bias is just different camps. It's naturally inappropriate for Buddhist cultivators to cultivate demonic arts because they are first and foremost Buddhist disciples. This status restricts them. If you don't have sectarian bias, then it's very simple. You just need to treat yourself as a pure cultivator. Whether it's Buddhist martial arts or demonic martial arts, it's all martial arts. Why can't you cultivate both? Meng Xinghe nodded in satisfaction. You're right, Chu. It's precisely because of sectarian bias that the path of martial arts in the underworld sometimes stagnates. I have an idea. Let's gather the strength of us prime sovereigns and share our cultivation techniques. The descendants of us prime sovereigns and the major sects of the underworld can all enter to cultivate. It doesn't matter one's background, only one's martial Tao. I wonder if Chu is interested? Chu Xiu was dumbfounded that Meng Xinghe had come to talk to him about this matter. He didn't know what the other party was thinking. In all fairness, Meng Xinghe's idea was actually pretty good. Martial Tao that was stagnant would only get weaker and weaker. Giving up on sectarian bias so that everyone could study martial Tao together was actually a good thing. However, Chu Xiu didn't trust Meng Xinghe. Even if Ning Xuanji had said this, Chu Xiu would believe it. However, Chu Xiu didn't believe Meng Xinghe. Regardless of whether he was hostile toward Chu Xiu or not, Chu Xiu was currently wary of him. This loose cultivator of the Milky Way galaxy, whose name had shaken the world hundreds of years ago, had a warm smile on his face. His entire body exuded a gentle aura. However, Chu Xiu could sense a trace of danger from him. In the end, Chu Xiu just smiled and said, I admire unfettered Meng's courage to be the first in the world. However, this matter is very important. Although I've taken over as prime sovereign, I still need to go back and discuss it with my master. Meng Xinghe nodded and said, In that case, I won't disturb Chu any further. After saying that, Meng Xinghe didn't insist. He walked directly to the others and said something. It should also be about this matter. The prime sovereign meeting ended after a day. After all, there were only more than 20 prime sovereigns present at the end. Including the successors, there were less than 100 people. One day was enough for the transaction. Before leaving, Chu Xiu wanted to find a chance to ask Long Longer and Luo Feiheng how they were doing, but he didn't find the opportunity. Su Tianya and Fang Baidu had lost their disciples. Now that they had finally found new disciples that they were satisfied with, they naturally treasured them very much. However, it didn't matter. Chu Xiu could tell from their appearance that they were progressing smoothly. Chapter 1326. After the end of the ancient venerable meeting, Su Tianya and the others did not bother him again. One reason was that they dared not. With the strength Chu Xiu had shown, they would not be able to defeat Chu Xiu unless the two of them attacked together. Moreover, whether it was the veteran primordial ultimate god expert or Meng Xinghe who was the new primordial ultimate god successor, they needed to be cautious. They really dared not act recklessly on such an occasion. After returning to the southern barbaric land, Chu Xiu didn't understand what Meng Xinghe's words meant, so he simply didn't bother to think about it. Instead, he went into closed-door cultivation to study the creation demonic Tao. The creation heavenly demon scripture that Qi Lianhai gave to Chu Xiu was passed down by the patriarch of his lineage after spending a lifetime of effort and gathering the efforts of several generations. Although it was impossible to directly deduce the creation demonic path to its peak, it still benefited Chu Xiu a lot. At that time, in the closed-door cultivation secret room, Chu Xiu was surrounded by black demon energy. It was so dense that it seemed to have turned into a substance. The dense demon energy penetrated into the surrounding heaven and earth law and evolved into earth, wind, water, and fire. In the end, it even directly turned the secret room where Chu Xiu was in into a devil's cave, as if it was a miniature primitive devil's cave. The next moment, the dense demon energy was taken back into Chu Xiu's body, and the miniature primitive devil's cave also dissipated. Chu Xiu breathed a sigh of relief with a hint of joy in his eyes. Previously, Tianhun had told Chu Xiu that Dugu Weiwei's domain could directly attack the origin of the demonic path. It could be said that his domain was a primitive devil's cave. The path that Chu Xiu took was already different from Dugu Weiwei's, but at that time he achieved the same effect by relying on the creation demonic path. At least in terms of the starting point of demonic path, Chu Xiu had already walked on a different path from Dugu Weiwei. Chu Xiu called out the inner demon in his mind and said, I will not only trick you into doing things. I said before that as long as my cultivation level in the creation demonic path improves, I can create a perfect body for you. Now, with my attainments in the creation demonic path, as long as there is enough blood essence, I can create a body for you. Mental demon had the memories of many warriors. He had always been waiting for the day he could truly become an adult. He had even resented Chu Xiu for standing him up time and time again. However, after waiting for Chu Xiu's promise, he was not as anxious. Hearing that, the inner demon asked, If I reconstruct my body, what realm can my power reach? Chu Xiu said, Qi, blood, and spirit are the foundation of the body. You are spirit. As long as I can obtain enough qi and blood of experts in the heaven and earth mysterious opening realm, I can create a body for you in the heaven and earth mysterious opening realm. The inner demon asked excitedly, What about the martial immortal realm? Chu Xiu shook his head and said, Don't even think about the martial immortal realm. Let's not talk about where I can kill martial immortals for you to bleed. The true power of a martial immortal lies in their control over the power of rules. The strongest warriors' memories that you devoured were only in the heaven and earth mysterious opening realm. So, you can only control the power of the heaven and earth mysterious opening realm. Even if I really create a body of a martial immortal, it will only be an empty shell. The inner demon nodded and thought for a while before saying, I have no idea yet. I'll tell you when I understand. Now that the opportunity had finally come, the inner demon was no longer anxious. This time, Chu Xiu spent over 3 months in seclusion to study the demonic path of creation. Originally, he was going to continue his seclusion, but coincidentally, someone knocked on the formation, reminding Chu Xiu that something had happened. When Chu Xiu came out of seclusion, Mei Qinglian immediately walked up and said, That fatty Sikong Tan is here. He said he found a clue about the source. When Chu Xiu heard that, he was taken aback. His first reaction wasn't joy, but he felt that Sikong Tan must have found the wrong thing. An existence like the source was definitely a treasure among treasures. It might even be kept by some top sections. How could Sikong Tan find it in such a short time? Chu Xiu didn't believe that the fatty would be so powerful. When Chu Xiu called Sikong Tan over, the fatty immediately cupped his hands and said in a flattering manner, I haven't seen Lord for a while. Lord's cultivation has improved again. The peak of the 9th heavenly layer can be said to be within your reach. Although Chu Xiu did have some gains during his seclusion, with Sikong Tan's eyesight, he couldn't tell whether Chu Xiu had improved or regressed. He was purely sucking up out of habit. Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, That's enough. Stop sucking up to me. I heard that you really found clues to the origin source? Sikong Tan nodded and said, According to the information Lord gave me, I have 90% certainty that it should be the source. However, I haven't seen the real thing, so I can't be certain. Oh, who is in possession of the source? It's in the hands of the Sanskrit sect. Sikong Tan said in a low voice, It's like this. After I took the resources Lord gave me, I expanded the divine machine gate. At the same time, I sent my trusted disciples to the western and northern regions to open up information channels. One of my disciples was even more ruthless. He actually shaved his head and became a monk, entering a small temple in the western regions. In the western regions, besides the 2 major Buddhist sects, the Tianluo Treasure Temple and the Sanskrit sect, there are also countless small temples belonging to the Sanskrit sect and the Zen sect. My disciple joined a temple belonging to the Zen sect, and has a very close relationship with the Tianluo Treasure Temple. It also has a rather long history. He read a story in the Sutra Pavilion of that small temple. It said that after the Tianluo Treasure Temple and the Sanskrit sect entered the Daoyuotian continent, they once fought over something and started a war. Chu Xiu said in a low voice, But according to my knowledge, the 2 sects have always been at odds with each other in the lower dimensions, and it can be said to be extremely common for both sides to start a great battle over the same thing. How can you be sure that what they're fighting over is the source energy? Sikong Tan explained, Because of that fight, even some small temples in the western regions were implicated. The temple that my disciple belongs to is on the side of the heavenly treasure instant, and the ancestor of that temple even personally fought for this item. Its appearance and effects are almost exactly the same as what official Chu said about the source. It emits a faint golden glow, but it is stored in an extremely precious secret box made of sun essence gold. After hearing Sikongtan's words, Chu Xiu was 90% sure that it was the source. However, it would be troublesome if this thing fell into the hands of the Sanskrit sect. Given the current scale of the Sanskrit sect, even if Chu Xiu used all his trump cards, he still wouldn't be able to defeat them. This source is now in the hands of the Sanskrit sect. Do you know if the Sanskrit sect has researched anything about it? Sikongtan shook his head and said, I really don't know about this. My disciple only heard a few words. This source was first obtained by the Tianluo treasure temple, but in the end, it was taken away by the Sanskrit sect. Moreover, at that time, one of the higher-ups of the Tianluo treasure temple sacrificed his life to seal a part of the power of that thing. They were thinking that even if they couldn't get it, they couldn't let the Sanskrit sect use it. Later, that thing should have been kept in the Vishnu temple of the Sanskrit sect. Although the strength of the Vishnu temple has always been inferior to the Shiva temple and the Brahma temple, they are good at all kinds of strange secret techniques. They have also researched all kinds of strange things. Therefore, the thing that is suspected to be the source has always been kept by the Vishnu temple. After hearing this, Chu Xiu rubbed his chin and narrowed his eyes. It could be said that Mei Qinglian understood Chu Xiu very well. When she saw his appearance, she could roughly guess what he was thinking. He must be plotting against someone else. Hey, I say, you can't be thinking about the Sanskrit sect, right? That is the Sanskrit sect that has the strongest people in the ninth heavens. The martial immortals of the Sanskrit sect added together are probably more than the entire eastern region. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, I killed Xian Jialua. Mei Qinglian had a look of speechlessness and said, I know you killed Xian Jialua, but the problem is the Sanskrit sect has more than one Xian Jialua. Right now, in the lower realm. In short, for now, it is better for us to keep a low profile. In fact, Mei Qinglian's character was not so conservative and stubborn. On the contrary, she was also a very radical and bold person. But compared to Chu Xiu, Mei Qinglian's so-called radical boldness was nothing. Chu Xiu was someone who dared to poke a hole in the sky. In normal times, if the Sanskrit sect repeatedly targeted them, Mei Qinglian would definitely agree to fight back. But in this kind of situation, the upper and lower realms might connect at any time. So it was better to be more obedient. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, I know that the Sanskrit sect has more than one Xian Jialua. But at the same time, the Sanskrit sect has more than one enemy. Xian Jialua was the new lord of the Vishnu palace of the Sanskrit sect. He had a promising future. When I killed him, it was equivalent to slapping the Sanskrit sect in the face. But after that, did anyone from the Sanskrit sect come to find trouble with me? No, there was only Yindala. But Yindala coming to find trouble with me was not an order from the higher-ups of the Sanskrit sect. Yindala came on his own for the world-ending fire. At this point, Chu Xiu revealed an unreadable smile. Obviously, in the eyes of the Sanskrit sect, I, Chu Xiu, am just an insignificant person. I killed Xian Jialua and slapped the Sanskrit sect in the face. They will be angry, but they will not put me on the table. Because now, there are more troublesome opponents waiting for them. For example, the treasure Buddha of heaven. As he said, Chu Xiu turned his gaze to Sikongtan. What's the situation in the entire western region now? Is it very sensitive? Sikongtan was stunned for a moment, then immediately said respectfully, Official Chu's eyes are like torches, and your foresight is like a god. During this period of time, the Sanskrit sect and the treasure Buddha of heaven did not have a fierce battle, but the three main palaces of the Sanskrit sect have begun to withdraw their forces at the same time. At the same time, the treasure Buddha of heaven also called back all the monks who were out on a parade. The atmosphere in the entire western region is like a storm, and no one knows when it will come. Chapter 1327. Xian Jialua's death at the hands of Chu Xiu was seen as a slap in the face to the Brahmin sect. Although martial immortals were precious and powerful, even in the Three Pristines Temple, which stood at the peak of the Daluotian world, Martial immortals were absolute powerhouses. A warrior at the first heaven could not affect the survival of the Sanskrit sect. Therefore, to them this was not a big deal. But in reality, Exayanjalua's death had broken the balance in the western region. The Sanskrit church possessed an incomparably deep foundation. According to Fong Yinglong, if Exayanjalua did not die and successfully entered the great heavenly divine palace, he would be able to directly reach the third level of martial immortal realm. Furthermore, the Sanskrit sect had a secret technique passed down by generations of martial immortals. It was a secret technique passed down by generations of martial immortals. It was not an infusion of power, but the power of laws. With the inheritance of the three gods, Exayanjalu could reach the sixth heavenly layer of martial immortal in an extremely short period of time. Thus, Exayanjalua's death was not as simple as the death of a level 1 martial immortal. Instead, it was the death of a level 6 martial immortal. It broke the balance between the Sanskrit school and the heavenly treasured Rakshasa. As for what the western regions would be like after the balance was broken, there was no need to say much. Just like what Sikongtan had said in his intelligence, a storm was brewing, and no one knew when it would erupt. Listening to Chu Xiu and Mei Qinglian's conversation, Sikongtan broke out in a cold sweat. What are they talking about? Plotting against the Sanskrit sect, the leader of the Buddhist sects in the western region? In the eyes of others, this was no different from courting death. Chu Xiu glanced at the nervous Sikongtan and said indifferently, "Don't worry, even if I make a move against the Sanskrit sect, I won't let you be the vanguard. First, give me a copy of the information your disciple has collected about the Sanskrit sect." After sending Sikongtan away, Mei Qinglian whispered from behind, "In fact, you don't have to be so anxious. There is still some time before the Dalu Ocean and the lower world unite. With our speed of development, by the time the upper and lower worlds reconnect, we can even develop a strength not inferior to High Heaven sect." Chu Xiu sighed softly and said, "Time? It was precisely because time was running out that I was in such a hurry. I need to make a trip to the western regions. If the plan goes smoothly, the forces under my command will be unified and ready to take action. I'll leave this matter to you. I'll go to the western region alone." Hearing what Chu Xiu said, Mei Qinglian did not continue to persuade him. She knew that once Chu Xiu had made a decision, it would not be easy to change it. However, there was one thing that she did not know. Chu Xiu was not afraid of the connection between the upper and lower realms, but Dugu Weiwei, who was hidden in the netherworld heaven. Even if the upper and lower realms were connected, with Chu Xiu's current strength, he had nothing to fear. It was enough for him to occupy a place in this chaotic world. But the Dugu Weiwei hiding in the netherworld heaven had been giving Chu Xiu pressure, especially after he felt the origin. When Tianhun told Chu Xiu about the origin, Chu Xiu only regarded the origin as the key to open the everlasting heaven. As a result, when he also obtained the origin, felt its power, and even benefited from it, Chu Xiu understood that the origin was not as simple as a key. Chu Xiu himself had obtained the origin of yin and yang, and he had not even used it yet. He had increased one level of martial immortal only by relying on a trace of power that overflowed when the origin of yin and yang collided. If he could really activate the power of the origin, how terrifying would it be? Dugu Weiwei had at least 2 origins in his hands, and it was even possible that he had 3. It had been 500 years since he had obtained these origins. Only God knew to what extent he had studied the power of the origin. Therefore, Chu Xiu could only use all means to catch up with him. There was a road from the southern region to the western region, but Chu Xiu did not take it. Instead, he went through the 100,000 mountains of the southern region to the western region. Chu Xiu was a well-known figure in the Dalu Ocean. Going to the western region at this time was a bit too obvious. Although Chu Xiu would encounter the barbarians in the southern barbaric land, the Black Luo tribe was already considered a large tribe in the entire southern barbaric land. With the token of the Black Luo tribe, Chu Xiu wouldn't cause too much of a commotion when he crossed the southern barbaric land. It was just that the road in the southern region was a bit difficult to travel. With Chu Xiu's current speed, it still took him more than a month to get out of the southern region and come to the western region. But after arriving in the western region, Chu Xiu found that he was a bit conspicuous. No wonder the disciple of Sikong Tan had to choose to join a small temple in the Zen sect to hide his identity and inquire for information. It was really hard to find a few rogue cultivators of other sects in the entire western region. When Chu Xiu walked in the entire land of the western region, the warriors who came and went were either monks or lay disciples who had not shaved their heads. Basically, there were very few rogue cultivators, so other warriors who came to the western region were unusually conspicuous. Fortunately, Chu Xiu had also cultivated a Buddhist cultivation technique. The aura around him changed, and in an instant, he had already become a Buddhist disciple who had not shaved his head, emitting a Buddhist glow. It did not seem out of place at all. The Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple and the Buddhist sect shared the western region equally, so the entire Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple was actually not a whole. Except for the headquarters temple, the other pavilions were scattered throughout the western region. The first person Chu Xiu wanted to find was his old friend, Fei Ming of the Huayan Pavilion. The Huayan Pavilion was stationed in the Pushan Commandery of the western region. The most central area was where the Huayan Pavilion was located. When Chu Xiu saw the location of the Huayan Pavilion, he was slightly surprised. The 10,000 feet wide temple hall was extremely magnificent. There was an endless stream of Buddhist monks and pilgrims coming and going. It could definitely be considered a peak of incense offerings. It was not inferior to the Subodhi Monastery and the Great Light Temple in the lower realm. It should be known that this was only a pavilion under the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. It was not where the main body of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple was located. In fact, the Huayan Pavilion was not the strongest in the entire Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. Chu Xiu walked to the door and said to the monk guarding the door, "I would like to request to see Master Fei Ming." The young monk guarding the door glanced at Chu Xiu and said lightly, "Sorry, Master Fei Ming does not see guests." Chu Xiu frowned. The monks of the western region, or rather the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple, were a little too arrogant. Why did he not notice this when he was in the Daluocean? Actually, these monks' attitudes were normal. The disciples in charge of guarding the door were the young elite disciples of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. They were young and arrogant. Moreover, in the entire western region, other than the hostile Sanskrit forces, all the itinerant cultivators in the temples were people of the Zen sect. No matter how strong they were, they still had to be polite when facing the warriors of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. Chu Xiu was a new face. He could not walk the streets with the aura of a martial immortal. It was normal for him to be looked down upon. Chu Xiu had a faint smile on his face as he touched his nose. He had not been treated like this in a long time. Some people feared him, and some hated him. However, the feeling of being ignored was something that Chu Xiu had not experienced in a long time. It actually gave him a very novel feeling. Of course, Chu Xiu did not have any special hobbies. With his current status, he did not need to lower himself to the level of a junior warrior. Even getting angry was not as good as it was. Therefore, Chu Xiu could not be bothered to waste any more time. A powerful force slowly emanated from his body, and a Vairocana phantom image appeared behind him. Buddhist chants suddenly descended. The powerful aura immediately scared the young monk who was guarding the door so much that he almost fell to the ground. Even the first seat of Huayan Pavilion didn't have this kind of power. Which high monk has come? Please forgive us for our poor hospitality. A dignified voice was heard as Fei Ming walked out with a solemn expression. However, after seeing Chu Xiu, Fei Ming's face revealed a look of surprise. "Young Master Chu? Why have you come to the western region?" Chu Xiu smiled and said, "Master Fei Ming, how have you been? This time, I have something to discuss with your celestial treasure temple. This matter is a bit secretive, so I'm afraid it's not appropriate to talk about it outside." Fei Ming hurriedly brought Chu Xiu to a side hall and asked, "Young Master Chu, is there something urgent that you need to talk about?" Although Fei Jing had warned Fei Ming in the Daluocean Temple that Chu Xiu was not an easy person to deal with, and that he had to be wary of him, Fei Ming was still a person who could clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. However, Fei Ming was a person who could clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. He only knew that Chu Xiu had saved his life, and the debt of saving his life could not be easily repaid. Chu Xiu did not answer Fa Ming directly. Instead, he asked, "Is the situation between the Celestial Treasure Temple and the Sanskrit sect very sensitive recently?" Fa Ming smiled bitterly. "Sensitive? It can be said that it is quite sensitive, and it will explode at the slightest provocation. The chief of Huayan Pavilion is not here right now. He is in the Celestial Treasure Temple discussing secrets with the other chiefs and pavilion masters." "Oh. Then why haven't they started fighting?" Fa Ming paused for a moment. Thinking that this was not a secret, he said, "It's nothing much. It's not that they don't want to fight, they just don't dare to. As for the recent events in the lower realm, I believe that young Master Chu, as the successor of the ancient sovereign, should already know. At this juncture, the Daoyuotian should not have too much internal strife, so in response to this situation, the ancient sovereign personally invited the World Supreme and the master of the Sanskrit sect to the northern region to discuss Tao." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. The master of the Sanskrit sect and the World Supreme of the Celestial Treasure Temple were not in the western region. This was somewhat unexpected to Chu Xiu. "So you don't dare to make a move without these two around?" Fa Ming shook his head. "It's not that we don't dare to make a move. It's just that although the Sanskrit sect lost a hall master, they still have a fighting chance if we really fight. We will also suffer heavy losses. Without the World Supreme, we can't even send a message. Who would dare to take such a big risk and order a fight to the death with the Sanskrit sect? But if we don't make a move, the chiefs and pavilion masters will not be satisfied. The previous lord of the Vishnu Palace died early, and the new lord of the Vishnu Palace was killed by young Master Chu. This is such a good opportunity for us to not make a move. It's really not satisfying." Chu Xiu squinted his eyes and said, "Now the masters don't have to be dissatisfied." "Why?" "Because I'm here." Chapter 1328. Fa Ming was just a straightforward person, but he wasn't an idiot who couldn't understand. When he understood Chu Xiu's meaning, he was shocked. "Young Master Chu wishes to join forces with the precious Temple of Empyrean?" Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. "Back at the exalted Divine Palace, when you were facing the Sanskrit, it was I who helped you solve the problem. Now that you are facing the Sanskrit, I can help you solve the problem as well. Great Master Fa Ming, do you think that I am fated to be with the Buddhist sects?" Fa Ming didn't know if Chu Xiu was fated to be with the Buddhist sects, but he did know that he had no say in this matter. "Young Master Chu, with my current position, I cannot interfere in this matter," Fa Ming said gravely. "The one in charge of the precious Temple of Empyrean is the head of the Life Transformation Pavilion, Zen Master Jishan. I will introduce him to you, young Master Chu. Then I'll have to trouble you, Great Master Fa Ming." The precious Temple of Empyrean was located in the very center of the eastern part of the western region. The Life Transformation Pavilion wasn't actually located there, but Zen Master Jishan was currently in charge of the temple on behalf of the World Exalted One, so he naturally had to stay inside. Chu Xiu had thought that the Flower Stern Pavilion was already very grand, but the grandeur of the precious Temple of Empyrean far exceeded Chu Xiu's imagination. When the entire precious Temple of Empyrean came into view, Chu Xiu even thought that he had arrived at the holy land of the Buddhist sects, the Spirit Mountain. As far as the eye could see, countless golden glazed temples and palaces had been constructed. Golden light enveloped the earth, and anyone who stepped within a few li of the precious Temple of Empyrean would feel as if they were immersed in a boundless Buddhist light. The strangest thing was that the Hall of Great Strength at the very center was actually floating in midair. Countless formations must have been used to support it. This had no effect on the hall's defenses. In any case, as far as Chu Xiu was concerned, it could only be used for one thing: pretentiousness. Chu Xiu's lips curled into a sneer at the thought of this. In fact, in the entire Daoyuotian world, no one was as overbearing as the celestial treasured Buddha. As for the other three regions, even the North region, where the Three Pristines Palace of Taoism reigned supreme, could accommodate other martial artists except for the Taoism lineage. But within the boundaries of the Western region, apart from the heavenly net treasure temples Zen sect and the Brahmin sect, there was almost no room for any other martial artists. Chu Xiu walked all the way from the Pusheng Commandery to the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. All the prefectures and prefectures that he passed through were dedicated to the monks of the temples. Ordinary people and low-level martial artists worshipped those small temples, and those small temples were dedicated to the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. Finally, the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple was a grand occasion. Fa Ming pointed at the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple with a proud expression. "Young Master Chu, please take a look. This is where my Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple is located. 10,000 years ago, when my Buddhist sect came to the western region, this place was still a barren wilderness. But now, it has become a Buddhist holy land that shines with Buddha's light." Chu Xiu sneered in his heart. For the sake of this Buddhist holy land, the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple had killed many people. Over the past 10,000 years, the hard work of countless people and low-level martial artists in half of the western region had been harvested by the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. In the holy radiance of the Buddha's light, Chu Xiu could faintly see a trace of blood swimming. Although he thought so, Chu Xiu still smiled and said respectfully, "As expected of the Buddhist holy land, the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple is magnificent and extraordinary." Fa Ming had a proud expression and asked Chu Xiu to wait at the door. He had to go in and report first. After a while, the door of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple opened, and a magnificent voice came. "Young Master Chu, please come in." The voice was magnificent and deep, even having the effect of shaking one's heart. It was as if all lies and deceptions would have no place to hide from this magnificent voice. Of course, with Chu Xiu's state of mind cultivation, the thickness of his skin, and the ability to lie without blinking, this thing was basically useless against him. Inside the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple, rows of Buddhist disciples shone with Buddha's light as they stared at Chu Xiu. The weakest among them was at the heaven and earth mysterious realm, and there were even several martial immortals among them. Moreover, this was certainly not all the martial immortals of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. For example, in the Life Transformation Pavilion or Huayan Pavilion, which were ranked at the top, the heads were basically all martial immortals. There were even 2 martial immortals in the Life Transformation Pavilion. If it was anyone else being stared at by so many Buddhist experts, they would definitely be extremely flustered. However, Chu Xiu had seen many big scenes, and was still extremely calm at this moment. He cupped his hands and said to the crowd, "Eastern regions, Chu Xiu greets the Great Masters and Great Master Fa Jing. Long time no see." Among the several old monks at the very front, the young-looking Fa Jing was extremely eye-catching. Furthermore, when Fa Jing left the Great Celestial Divine Palace, he was only a 3rd-layer martial immortal. Yet he was now a 5th-layer martial immortal. The Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple was also a great sect that had existed for countless years in the lower realms. They definitely had some sort of method that could raise the cultivation of a martial immortal. Fa Jing nodded and pointed to an old monk beside him. The old monk was dressed in golden monk robes, but had not shaved his head. He had long gray hair and said, "This is our Life Transformation Pavilion's head, Zen Master Jishan." The old monk with long hair and not shaved his head even looked kind and amiable. However, Chu Xiu knew that he was definitely an extremely terrifying existence. The Life Transformation Pavilion was one of the strongest temples under the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. In terms of battle prowess, they had once defeated the Sanskrit sect's strongest sect, Shiva Palace, to the point of being unable to raise their heads. They had even specially developed the World Annihilation Flame that could block the purifying Lotus Buddhist light. Since Zen Master Jishan was the chief of the Life Transformation Pavilion, then his hands must have been stained with the lives of many Sanskrit cultivators. Zen Master Jishan looked at Chu Xiu and said in a deep voice, "Just now, Fa Ming said that you can help my Tian Luo Treasure Temple to deal with Sanskrit?" Chu Xiu nodded and said, "Yes." "Why?" "Because Sanskrit is also my enemy." Chu Xiu waved his hand fiercely and said with an angry look on his face, "Previously, Brahma sect's Vishnu Palace Lord was bewitched by Heavenly King Palace Lord, and came to find trouble with me for no reason. In the end he was killed by me. After that, the new Lord of Vishnu Palace, Shingala, targeted me again and again. In the Great Luo Divine Palace, I joined hands with Great Master Fa Jing to kill him. From then on, Sanskrit hated me completely. I wonder if Zen Master Jishan has heard that not long ago, the vice-temple master of Shiva Palace, In Tualuo, had joined hands with the sword sect of the southern region to cause trouble for me. I can see that if the Sanskrit sect is not destroyed, I will never have a day of peace. So, I won't let go of any opportunity to deal a heavy blow to the Sanskrit sect. Zen Master Jishan did not pay any attention to Chu Xiu's incomparably furious and indignant expression. He remained calm as he asked, "In the exalted heaven, you were able to join forces with Fa Jing because you had the strength to do so. And now you want to join hands with the entire heavenly Luo treasured monastery? Why?" Chu Xiu pointed at himself and said in a deep voice, "It's also because of my strength. I, Chu Xiu, have the cultivation of a third heaven martial immortal, but I can fight against a fifth heaven martial immortal. I also have 2 first heaven martial immortal experts under my command, and a force not inferior to the entire Imperial Sky Pavilion. I wonder, is that enough?" Some of the monks present revealed strange expressions. Although they were from the western region, they were not completely ignorant of the situation in the other 3 regions. The force under Chu Xiu's command was not inferior to the Imperial Sky Pavilion. In fact, it had far surpassed the Imperial Sky Pavilion. However, they had never heard of a large-scale war in the eastern region. How did Chu Xiu accumulate such a force? Zen Master Jishan shook his head and said, "It's enough to deal with ordinary small sects, but it's not enough to deal with the Sanskrit sect." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "No, it's enough. I've heard from Master Fa Ming that the heavenly Luo treasured monastery hasn't made a move yet. It's in a stalemate with the Sanskrit sect because it's worried that it will injure itself if it continues to fight, which will affect the strength of the heavenly Luo treasured monastery. However, the balance between the heavenly Luo treasured monastery and the Sanskrit sect has been broken. What's missing is the last straw that breaks the camel's back." Chu Xiu pointed at himself and said, "I am that last straw. In the Sanskrit sect, Shiva Palace and Brahma Palace are the strongest, followed by Vishnu Palace. These 3 palaces guard the 3 western regions of the western region. Your temple understands the Sanskrit sect very well, and I'm sure the Sanskrit sect also understands your temple very well. Therefore, as long as the heavenly Luo treasured monastery puts all its strength into the battlefield, and let the Sanskrit sect attack with all their strength, I'm willing to attack the Vishnu Palace from the rear, so that the 3 palaces of the Sanskrit sect will be reduced to 2. The monks looked at each other. Chu Xiu's method was feasible. It should be said that it was very feasible. If they could eliminate one of the palaces of the Sanskrit sect, even if it was the weakest Vishnu Palace, it would be enough to make the Sanskrit sect suffer a great loss. An old monk could not help but ask, "What you said is simple, but although the Vishnu Palace is the weakest in the entire Sanskrit sect, all kinds of strange techniques, formations and other things are developed by the Vishnu Palace. Once the war starts, there will certainly be people guarding the Vishnu Palace. What will you do? Moreover, you brought so many people to the eastern region. I'm afraid that the Sanskrit sect will be aware of you as soon as you reach the western region. Do you think that the Sanskrit sect is blind?" Chu Xiu said indifferently, "As long as the heavenly Luo treasured monastery attacks with all its strength, how strong will the people guarding the Vishnu Palace be? I can kill anyone under the 6th-fold sky. As for the location of the surprise attack, when did I say that I want to attack the Sanskrit sect openly? Since it is a surprise attack, it naturally needs to be a little more secretive. I will go around to the western region from the 10,000 Great Mountains and attack the Vishnu Palace." But those barbarians of the southern barbarian land. Without waiting for the old monk to finish his words, Chu Xiu directly said, "Master, you don't need to worry about this. That is my problem. Now I have come to the western region from thousands of miles away, come to the heavenly Luo treasured monastery, and have already revealed the entire plan. In the end, masters, will you agree or not?" Everyone present turned their eyes to Zen Master Jishan. The heavenly Luo treasured monastery had strict rules. There would never be a situation where there was a disagreement or a quarrel. Before the revered one of the world left, he had given the power to control the heavenly Luo treasured monastery to Zen Master Jishan. Now any decision of the heavenly Luo treasured monastery, as long as Zen Master Jishan nodded his head, it would count. Zen Master Jishan looked at Chu Xiu with an unfathomable look in his eyes. After a long time he said, "Can I trust Benefactor Chu?" Chu Xiu said boldly, "Of course you can. I, Chu Xiu, am a man of my words. Those who have cooperated with me have never regretted it." Zen Master Jishan put his palms together and said in a deep voice, "After 3 months, the heavenly Luo treasured monastery will begin to gather and attack the Sanskrit sect. I hope Benefactor Chu will not let the heavenly Luo treasured monastery down at that time." Chapter 1329. After receiving Zen Master Jishan's promise, Chu Xiu immediately took his leave and prepared to return to the eastern region. Chu Xiu did not know what was going on in Tianluo Jewel Temple's mind. But he only knew that if the current leader of Tianluo Jewel Temple was a powerful person, he would definitely agree to it. If he let go of such an opportunity to severely damage Sanskrit, when the next Lord of Vishnu Temple grows up, Sanskrit and Tianluo Jewel Temple will once again be in balance. At this time, in Tianluo Jewel Temple, the old monk who previously questioned Chu Xiu saw Chu Xiu's figure disappear completely. He could not help but ask, "Chief, can Chu Xiu's words be trusted? Other than in the Daoyu Ocean, we have never come into contact with him. What if he deceives us?" Zen Master Jishan said in a deep voice, "Of course not. He is deceitful and full of lies." The old monk was surprised and asked, "Then why did you agree to it?" Zen Master Jishan looked to the west and said lightly, "Because one thing he said is true, he also wants to destroy Sanskrit. The reason is not important. What is important is the result. He will not deceive Tianluo Jewel Temple about this result." Why? Because in the entire Daoyu Ocean, no one can offend both Tianluo Jewel Temple and Sanskrit at the same time. The enmity between Chu Xiu and Sanskrit was real. A palace lord and a temple lord had died in Chu Xiu's hands. For so many years, it could be said that other than Tianluo Jewel Temple, no one could make Sanskrit suffer such a great loss. But now Chu Xiu did it, so the enmity between him and Sanskrit was irreconcilable. If he still dared to offend Tianluo Jewel Temple at this time, he could only be a madman. Zen Master Jishan could see that Chu Xiu was lying, but he could also see that Chu Xiu was not a madman, so naturally he would not do such things. Go all halls, the bigger the better. Let the Sanskrit sects see that our heavenly Luo treasure temple is ready to eradicate these heretics. After returning to the southern barbaric land, Chu Xiu did not delay and immediately called all the martial artists who were in seclusion to the Daoyu Ocean continent, leaving only a small number of people to guard the lower realm. He only had 3 months. It had taken him more than a month to return from the western regions, and it would take him another month to go there again. Because there were so many people, it would take even longer this time. Therefore, there was not much time left for Chu Xiu to gather people. When the people from the lower realm came out of seclusion one after another, Chu Xiu told them about what had happened. Wei Shuya and the others were not too surprised. Since Chu Xiu had gone to the western region and settled the matter, it proved that Chu Xiu had a certain degree of confidence in this matter. They only needed to execute it. Chen Qingdi's eyes lit up. The bald donkeys of Sanskrit. They were beaten up as soon as they came out of seclusion. Not bad, not bad. In fact, Chen Qingdi's path of martial arts was also suitable for breaking through in the midst of battle. Although he was basically the one who was one-sidedly abused in the battle with Jun Wuxian, and had even lost an arm before he could recover, but he had also gained a lot of enlightenment in his cultivation. Lu Jiang he reminded him from the side. Sanskrit is not bald donkeys, they have hair. Chen Qingdi waved his hand casually and said, "Who cares anyway, they are the same as bald donkeys." Lu Jiang he reminded again. Sanskrit and Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple are not the same. Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple is a branch of Zen. They have some origins, but they are completely different. Chen Qingdi looked at Lu Jiang he with an unfriendly expression. Is this guy addicted to tearing me down? Seeing Chen Qingdi's expression, Lu Jiang he immediately shrunk his neck and quickly said, "If you say it's the same, then it's the same. As long as you are happy." Lu Jiang he was still a little afraid of Chen Qingdi. It should be said that he was a little afraid of this kind of crazy battle maniac. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "All right, don't talk nonsense. We don't have much time. Let's go to the southern barbarian land immediately. Hey Jie Green Jade, how much do you know about the barbarians near the western region?" He Jie and Green Jade were specially called by Chu Xiu from the depths of the southern barbarian land. Previously, he might not have attracted attention when he went through the southern barbarian forest alone, but this time he was going to cross the southern barbarian forest with tens of thousands of people. Unless the barbarians were blind, they would not turn a blind eye to it. He Jie said, "I have some dealings with them. The barbarian tribes in the western barbarian forest are very big, much bigger than our current He Jie tribe. Moreover, they have a large tribe, the Luoshan tribe, which governs dozens of tribes in the western barbarian forest. The leader of the Luoshan tribe, the old barbarian king, is very strong. I'm afraid he is not weaker than you, divine envoy. Moreover, the old barbarian king is fair and has never bullied other tribes. He even helped those tribes when they were short of prey. Therefore, he is respected by other tribes. If you want to cross the southern barbarian forest, as long as you can deal with the old barbarian king, then everything can be solved." Chu Xiu nodded and said, "You guys come with me to the western barbarian forest first. The others will follow behind." Compared to dealing with the top sects like the Daluotian, Chu Xiu actually preferred dealing with the barbarians. At least there were fewer tricks. The Luoshan tribe was located in the deepest part of the western barbarian forest. The last time Chu Xiu went to the western region, he did not pass by this place. There were many checkpoints formed by small tribes to block his way. But with He Jie and Green Jade leading the way, the Black Luo tribe could be considered as a large tribe among the barbarians. Therefore, everyone gave way to them. After walking for several days, the Luoshan tribe finally appeared in front of Chu Xiu. Most of the barbarian tribes were very simple and crude. Because it was convenient to migrate, the barbarians themselves did not care about it. But the Luoshan tribe looked like a small city. It was built using bluestone, which was rare in the southern barbarian forest. It looked very decent. In fact, many of the buildings were built in imitation of human cities. This made Chu Xiu feel very novel. He Jie, Green Jade, and Chu Xiu had just arrived at the gate when they heard a loud rumbling sound. Then a man fell down from the gate. The barbarian was more than 20 feet tall. Even the tall and mighty He Jie looked like a dwarf in front of him. He wore a tiger skin skirt, and his naked upper body was covered with tattoos. Even his face was covered with tattoos. He looked like a devil at first glance. The ground seemed to shake with every step of this giant barbarian. His body contained a formidable strength. It could be said that he was the strongest barbarian Chu Xiu had ever seen apart from Chunqing Di. "Hey Jie, did you bring this human to add to our dinner tonight? Also, the little girl Green Jade is here. Have you thought it through and decided to marry me? The strongest warrior should have the prettiest girl. Marry me, Longshan, and I promise you that you will have countless prey. I can even break the horn of the mountain flood dragon for you." Chu Xiu looked at the giant with a strange expression. Then he looked at Green Jade, who was only slightly taller than an ordinary girl. Chu Xiu did not dare to think too much about it. Green Jade's face turned red, and she said angrily, "Longshan, I am the priest of He Luo tribe. What nonsense are you talking about? Insulting me is insulting my He Luo tribe. Do you really think that you can bully my He Luo tribe as you please?" Longshan opened his big mouth and smiled. "Mother taught me that you girls all have one thing in your mouth and another in your heart. You obviously want to do it in your heart, but you have to refuse with your mouth. You will only agree after asking for it several times. Troublesome, really troublesome. But, you are the most beautiful pearl of He Luo tribe. If you think one time is not enough, I can come a few more times." He Jie's face darkened. "Longshan, this is the divine messenger of He Luo tribe. Don't be rude. I told you before that I want to see the old barbarian king." Then, He Jie whispered to Chu Xiu, "Divine messenger, he is the #1 warrior of Luoshan tribe Longshan. He is very strong, and even I am not his match. It was said that when his mother was pregnant, she had killed a ferocious beast, the black dragon." That might have been the last black dragon in the entire 100,000 mountains. Long Shan was born bathed in the dragon's blood, so he had extraordinary strength since he was young. But I heard that his head fell on a dragon's horn when he was born. So his brain is not very good. I hope Lord doesn't take offense. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. He suddenly felt that Long Shan's mother was a ruthless person. She was about to give birth, but she was still able to kill an ancient fierce beast? Long Shan disdainfully said. Isn't he just a human? What divine messenger? He hadn't finished speaking when an old voice came from the city. Long Shan, don't cause trouble. Bring them in. Hearing this voice, Long Shan obediently brought Chu Xiu and the others into the city center. They arrived at a bluestone hall. But when Chu Xiu climbed the stairs of the hall, he felt that something was wrong. On the stone pillars of the hall, not only were there many barbarian race totems, but there were also Buddhist Sanskrit and Taoist Tao patterns. It was very unusual to see such things in the barbarian tribe. When Chu Xiu entered the hall and saw the old barbarian king that He Jia held in such high esteem, Chu Xiu was truly shocked. Although his expression didn't change, his eyes were filled with shock. The person sitting on the main seat of the hall was a tall and robust old Taoist. His hair was tied up in a bun, and he wore a moon-white Taoist robe embroidered with cloud patterns. The aura he emitted was incomparably deep. It was not the aura of the barbarian race, but the aura of a martial immortal. Moreover, not even Chu Xiu could see through his cultivation. His cultivation was most definitely higher than his own. If the old man before him was not sitting here, but in a Taoist temple in the outside world, he would definitely be the headmaster of a large Taoist sect. Who would have thought that he was the most famous old barbarian king in the barbarian race? For the first time, Chu Xiu felt that he had miscalculated. He might have to change one of the methods he had prepared to deal with the barbarian race. At the same time, Chu Xiu fiercely glared at He Jia and Green Jade. Why didn't you mention this beforehand? He Jia and Green Jade were also a bit at a loss. They didn't know what they had done wrong. The old barbarian king has always been like this. You didn't even ask him about it. At this moment, the old barbarian king spoke in standard Central Plains Chinese. Little friend, you've come from afar. Please take a seat. Chapter 1330. In the barbarian tribe, Chu Xiu was facing a barbarian who was no different from a Daluotian martial artist. This made Chu Xiu feel very awkward. He did not know what to say to the words he had prepared before coming here. At this time the old barbarian king smiled and said, Little friend, you are very surprised, right? This is normal. Anyone who sees a Daluotian martial artist will be surprised. It has been 10,000 years. Although many people in my tribe only grow muscles and not brains, there are still a few who are enlightened, right? Coincidentally, I was the one who was enlightened. When I was young, I was actually very thin and weak in the tribe. Of course, this is compared to my tribe. So, when I wanted to become a high priest, I only liked to study those messy secret techniques. But later on, the tribe caught a martial artist. I was very interested in him, and I was even more interested in the outside world. Ordinary people can't learn Central Plains Chinese, but I learned it in a year. Because I was not a barbarian warrior, I did not have that many totems on my body. Moreover, my figure was very similar to that of a human. So I had the idea of going to the outside world to take a look. I was a very bold person. I thought so, and so I did. The outside world is very big and exciting. I have to admit that the martial arts, formation, alchemy, and other things that you humans have developed are all grand and broad, and they constantly attract me. Over the years, I have joined many sections. I heard that you are the prefectural governor of the Imperial Sky Pavilion? Then you should call me senior. When I was traveling in the eastern region, I joined the Imperial Sky Pavilion and was in charge of guarding the primitive emperor realm. In the southern region, I joined the World Sword sect to learn swordsmanship, and I also joined the Bliss Demon Palace to learn demonic secret techniques. You don't have to be nervous. I know you destroyed the Bliss Demon Palace, but it doesn't matter because I don't like the Bliss Demon Palace. Their martial arts are too extreme. I have traveled in the western region, but I didn't join any temple because I cultivated demonic techniques. The martial arts of the Buddhist sects are too extreme, and they can't tolerate any kind of power. In the end, I went to the northern region, joined the Lingbao Temple, and cultivated the Lingbao glow. The time I spent in the Spirit Treasure Temple was the most precious and unforgettable. In the past, I always thought that you humans were the cruelest creatures. You fought and schemed against each other within your sections. In a situation where there was no conflict of interest, you would develop malice and harm each other. But in the Lingbao Temple, I learned what it meant to be a master, and what it meant to be a family. But in the end, I still left because my family was in the dense forest of the Grand Myriad Mountains. Alright, little friend, now that you know about I's experience, it's time for you to talk about yours, right? You and I are the same kind of people. If you continue to use your identity as a divine messenger to fool me, I'm afraid you won't be able to walk out of Luoshan tribe today. Old Barbarian King had a faint smile on his face. He wasn't as honest as an ordinary barbarian. Instead, he seemed like an experienced and astute leader of a big sect. Chu Xiu heaved a long sigh, cupped his hands and said, Chu Xiu of the Eastern Domain Greet Senior. The reason why I'm here is very simple. I've joined hands with the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple to launch a surprise attack on the Sanskrit sect. So, I've chosen to take a detour through the Grand Myriad Mountains in order not to be noticed by the Sanskrit sect. I've come to Luoshan tribe this time to borrow the road. If the old barbarian king had acted like a standard barbarian, then Chu Xiu would have had countless ways to fool him. But the man before him had mingled with the Daluotian people for countless years. He had traveled to 4 regions and stayed in the Imperial Sky Pavilion, the World Sword Sect, the Blissful Devil Palace, and the Spirit Treasure Temple for such a long time. Moreover, the strength of the other party was certainly extremely terrifying. Chu Xiu couldn't see through the realm of the other party, so he was at least at the 7th heaven layer. Moreover, the other party had a strong barbarian body, so his fighting strength was comparable to an 8th heaven layer martial immortal, at the very least. He would be courting death if he tried to play some petty tricks in front of such overwhelming strength. So, he might as well reveal everything. Old Barbarian King was also startled after he heard Chu Xiu's words. Of course, he knew what the Sanskrit sect and the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple represented. The young man before him dared to intervene in the battle between the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple and the Sanskrit sect. Moreover, he even wanted to take action himself. Such a bold action was beyond the old Barbarian King's imagination. After pondering for a moment, the old Barbarian King knocked on the dragon bone chair he was sitting on and said in a deep voice, It's just borrowing the road. It's not a big deal for I, but it's very important for you. According to the rules of the human race, you have to pay as much as you gain. I can agree to let you borrow the road. But what can you pay? Chu Xiu said in a deep voice. What does Senior want? As long as it's within my power, I won't refuse. The old Barbarian King stretched out 2 fingers and said in a deep voice, These 2 things are very simple. I can't make the decision in the 100,000 mountains. You have too many subordinates. If you want to go to the western region through the 100,000 mountains, you'll have to detour around several tribes. Even if I give the order, you'll have to show your strength to the chiefs of the other tribes. You know the rules of my race. The one with the biggest fist has the loudest voice. You have to fight with the warriors of my race in public. And you can proceed to the next step if you win. As for the second thing, I want a lot of things. Weapons, armors, array materials, and healing medicines. I want all the resources that a warrior needs. Of course, I don't want them for free. I can take out the specialties of the 100,000 mountains and trade them with you at the normal price. Chu Xiu gawked for a moment as he heard this. Then he immediately nodded and said, No problem. The old Barbarian King was also dumbfounded when he heard Chu Xiu's quick reply. That was because Chu Xiu's reply was too simple. The big sects of the outside world had also traded with the barbarian race for many years. However, they were afraid of the rise of the barbarian race. Therefore, they had always controlled the number of barbarians. In fact, they had even bullied the barbarians for being simple-minded. After all, both sides belonged to different camps. The old Barbarian King had thought that Chu Xiu would limit the number of barbarians. He hadn't expected that Chu Xiu would agree so quickly. In fact, he himself couldn't believe it. Little friend, are you trying to deceive me? Are you planning to renege on your debt after I'm done? The old barbarian king looked at Chu Xiu with an unkind expression on his face. Chu Xiu forced a smile and said, I, Chu Xiu, don't have a very good reputation in the Daluotian kingdom. But I'm also famous for keeping my word. So, how can I do such a thing? Moreover, this isn't a big deal. All of the weapons and armors of the Black Civ tribe have been distributed by me. Even the materials of the armors used by the tribes around the Black Civ tribe have been distributed by me. Now that I've gained another trading partner, why would I go back on my word? The old barbarian king asked in reply, Aren't you afraid that my tribe will become a threat to your sex after it grows stronger? Chu Xiu finally understood the mentality of the opposite party after he heard the question of the old barbarian king. He wasn't a Daluotian. And he wasn't the one who had massacred the barbarian race. So he obviously didn't care about that. Of course, Chu Xiu wouldn't say that. He only said in a deep voice, the barbarian race and the human race. In my opinion, we are one family. So what's the threat? Senior, you are a barbarian. But what's the difference between you and the martial immortal experts of my human race? Although you and I are from two different worlds, we share the same origin. There are countless fights and killings between the sects. So, why would I care about the fights and killings between the two races? I don't know about other people. But I, Chu Xiu, only have two kinds of people in my eyes, friends and enemies. The Sanskrit sect has tried to kill me time and time again. So they are my enemies. The Black Luo tribe works for me. Senior, your Luo Shan tribe has lent me a path. So, they are my friends. And since we are friends, why would I worry about being threatened? The old barbarian king had always been calm and collected when he heard Chu Xiu's words. But he felt a bit excited in his heart. He was a member of the barbarian race. He had joined the human race's sects in the beginning. But he hadn't harbored any good intentions. He had joined the human race as a spy. He had wanted to learn the cultivation techniques of the human race, as well as how to refine weapons and concoct pills. Then he would launch a counterattack against the human race. However, during his time in the Spirit Treasure Temple, he had been influenced by his master, senior brothers, and junior brothers in the Spirit Treasure Temple. Those fellow disciples, who seemed unruly but were closer to him than family, had completely dissolved the hatred and prejudice between the two clans in his heart. However, he had come to know that he was the only person who didn't have any prejudices against the human race after he had returned to the Luo Shan tribe. The barbarian race was still hostile to the human race. They wanted to recapture their land and homeland. However, the human race regarded the barbarian race as wild beasts. So they were always on guard against the rise of the barbarian race. Chu Xiu was the first person he had ever met who didn't have any prejudices against the barbarian race. The old barbarian king didn't know the true meaning of Chu Xiu's words. However, he could feel that Chu Xiu didn't have any enmity or vigilance against the barbarian race. The old barbarian king sighed and said, It's very rare to find a person like you among the Daluotian tribes. Chu Xiu didn't know why, but he suddenly felt that the old barbarian king's attitude towards him seemed to have become a lot friendlier. Chu Xiu replied in a sinking voice, No one's thoughts are exactly the same. In fact, I'm also very puzzled. Senior doesn't have much enmity against the human race. The old barbarian king gently shook his head and said, My race has failed to live up to expectations. So it's useless to have enmity against the human race. My race has always resented the human race for snatching our land and slaughtering our people. However, I also figured it out during my time in the Spiritual Treasure Temple. The emergence of the human race has actually made our race take a step forward. Perhaps you can't imagine what our race was like 10,000 years ago. Our race was ignorant at that time. We had to fight against the ferocious beasts of the world. There were only two things in our life, reproduction and slaughter. We killed the ferocious beasts, and the tribes killed each other. We even killed for fun to select the strongest. We even sacrificed living people during the day of sacrifice. It was bloody and cruel. It's no wonder that the human race regarded us as wild beasts at that time. Now 10,000 years have passed. Our race has actually made a lot of progress. At least, we don't casually kill for fun. What we pursue is power, not bloody slaughter. Similarly, we also know that the tribes belong to the same clan and should help each other. Therefore, the emergence of the human race seems to me like the cycle of the heavens. It's a calamity. It's the punishment of our ignorance. Chapter 1331. The old barbarian king's way of thinking was very similar to that of a human. It could be said that he was almost a human apart from his bloodline. However, Chu Xiu didn't feel anything about the things he had said. After all, he wasn't a barbarian, and he wasn't a Daluotian. Chu Xiu said in a sinking voice, "Senior, please rest assured. I'll send someone to trade with the Luoshan tribe after I return from the western regions." The old barbarian king nodded and said, "I believe your words now. The chiefs and priests of the other tribes around my Luoshan tribe have already arrived in advance after they knew that you're coming. No one will stop you in this region of the 10,000 mountains as long as your strength can convince them. In fact, it's very easy to convince my tribe. They only worship the strong." However, the old barbarian king sighed and said, "But I'd rather them be more complicated than naive." The old barbarian king waved his hand after saying that, and sent people to invite the chiefs of the major tribes to the center of the city. The center of the Luoshan tribe's city turned out to be an array formation. It was a standard Taoist array formation. However, Chu Xiu didn't find it strange after knowing the identity of the old barbarian king. The old barbarian king had stayed in the spiritual treasure temple for a long time. Although the number of people in the spiritual treasure temple was very small, but it was definitely one of the few big sects among the Taoist branches. Its inheritance was incomparably deep. So it was normal for the old barbarian king to learn the orthodox Taoist array formation. The other barbarian chiefs and priests who were present on the scene pounded their chests with their right fists. They then knelt down on one knee and gave the old barbarian king a big salute. This was the most formal salute of the barbarian race. It was second only to prostrating themselves before their ancestors and gods. The old barbarian king was the only one who had conquered their bodies and hearts in these years. Therefore, they respected and awed him from the bottom of their hearts. The old barbarian king spoke a few simple words in the barbarian language in front of everyone. Chu Xiu couldn't understand it. He reckoned that the meaning was very simple, so he didn't need to make it too complicated for these barbarian warriors. Everyone looked at Chu Xiu with eagerness in their eyes after he finished speaking. For the barbarians, fighting was never a shameful thing. In fact, they even took fighting as a source of joy and glory. Usually they were the ones fighting among themselves. Now that they had a chance to fight against outsiders and win glory, they couldn't ask for more. But at this time Long San, who was standing beside old barbarian king, suddenly shouted, "Old barbarian king, I want to fight him." Old barbarian king's complexion suddenly turned black. "Don't cause trouble." Long Shan roared, "I'm not messing around." Green Jade kept looking at him. She must be interested in this outsider pretty boy. I want to defeat him and prove to Green Jade that only I, Long Shan, am a true expert. That outsider is just a pretty boy who looks good, but is useless. Chu Xiu was not angered. After reaching the martial immortal realm, he discovered that his temper had become much better. To be exact, it was because his cultivation had changed. For some things he was much more open-minded. There was no need for him to get angry at such a stubborn fellow. However, Chu Xiu touched his chin. He still felt a bit strange. Over the years, people in the martial world had called him all sorts of things. The better ones would be Lord Cult Leader, Young Master, and the like, while the worse ones would be Demonic Path Villain, Old Thief Chu Xiu, and so on. However, no one had ever called him a gigolo. But then again, Chu Xiu was the fairest among the barbarians. He was even fairer than Green Jade. At this time Green Jade, who was standing beside Chu Xiu, shouted with a red face, "Don't talk nonsense. I am the priest of the Black Luo tribe. How can I marry you?" She was really looking at Chu Xiu just now. However, it was not because of that. It was because she realized from the conversation between Chu Xiu and the old barbarian king that she and He Jie seemed to have done something wrong. So she was carefully looking at Chu Xiu. She wanted to see if the divine emissary was angry or not. But in the end she was exposed by Longshan. The old barbarian king's face turned black. He wanted to reprimand Longshan. However, Chu Xiu said at this time, "It doesn't matter who I fight with. I can fight with this big guy. But if I beat him, will the leaders of the other tribes recognize me?" The old barbarian king said, "Longshan is the #1 warrior of my Luoshan tribe. He is stronger than the leaders here. If you beat him, they will certainly recognize you. However, you must consider this carefully. Longshan's strength is not ordinary. He was born with the blood of dragons. Although his brain is not good, he possesses exceptional talent in battle. Ordinary martial immortals are no match for him." Chu Xiu smiled and said, "Ordinary martial immortals are also not my match." After hearing Chu Xiu's words, the old barbarian king waved his hand and opened the formation in the center of the city. Then he let Longshan and Chu Xiu enter. Longshan held a huge beast bone hammer that was 3 zhang long. He pointed it at Chu Xiu and said in a low and muffled voice, "I will let you know that only the strongest person is worthy of the most beautiful pearl of the Black Sieve tribe." Chu Xiu shrugged his shoulders and said with the tone of an experienced person, "Your way of thinking is very dangerous. If you want to chase a woman, you must use your heart and not your fists. So much nonsense." Mother said that in the past, whenever our tribe took a fancy to a girl, we would just knock her out with a club and carry her back. Then, she could become our wife. Now it is really troublesome. As Longshan's voice faded, the beast bone hammer in his hand smashed down like a small mountain. The power of the hammer shook the void and caused the entire city to sway. The surrounding formation was immediately activated. With this attack, Chu Xiu understood why the old barbarian king said that ordinary martial immortals were no match for Longshan. Longshan was not a martial immortal, but a pure barbarian. However, his casual attack displayed the pinnacle of power laws. It was as if he himself was a part of the power laws. Even if the martial immortals of the War God sect were here, they might not be as familiar with the usage of power laws as Longshan. At some point in time, Chu Xiu had already grasped the formation-breaking sword in his hand. Faced with the power laws that seemed as if the heavens were collapsing and the earth was sinking, Chu Xiu slashed out with his saber. It was an extremely powerful saber strike. Heaven-devouring. The deep and serene blade light was like a black hole, swallowing all power. The 3-feet-long blade collided with the 10-feet-long beast bone hammer. The impact of the collision even covered everything in front of them, making it impossible to see the situation inside the formation. The old barbarian king's eyes shrank. Obviously, he also recognized the heaven devouring of the 7 limits. He had traveled the 4 realms of the Daluocean and joined several sections. His vision and experience were even deeper than that of ordinary Daluocean martial immortals. It was normal for him to recognize the 7 limits. But because of this, he didn't expect that there would be someone who was willing to practice this ominous blade technique. After 10 breaths, the storm of power completely dissipated, and everyone could see the scene inside the formation. Chu Xiu stood with his blade in hand, his expression unchanged. Longshan had been blasted into a corner, but he didn't seem to be injured. However, the beast bone hammer in his hand had been blasted into ashes. Looking at the beast bone hammer in his hand that had turned into ashes, Longshan stood up, pointed at Chu Xiu, and shouted angrily, "Unfair! Your saber is much sharper than my hammer." The old barbarian king's face darkened, and he immediately wanted to reprimand Longshan. He wanted to tell him that the weapon itself was a part of one's strength. If you don't have the strength to obtain a good weapon, how can you blame others for having a good weapon? But Chu Xiu directly flipped his hands and put the formation-breaking formation into the secret box. He spread out his hands and lightly said, "Okay, then let's not use weapons to fight." Longshan let out a long breath and rushed over like a Tyrannosaurus dragon. His feet landed on the ground, and in an instant, the whole ground began to explode and tumble. But before he could get close, Chu Xiu had already formed a seal with his hands. The 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet on his wrist shone brightly, and the 6 paths of Saha wondrous splendor wheel appeared. The power of the 6 paths of reincarnation directly wrapped Longshan within it. The power of the heaven realm descended a mighty pressure, the power of the hungry ghost realm eroded the body, and the mortal realm obliterated all power. The huge will constantly bombarded Longshan's surroundings, and at the same time, it shook his primordial spirit, causing him to constantly scream. The old barbarian king's complexion changed again. He had never seen this cultivation technique before. It was either created by Chu Xiu himself, or it was inherited from his lineage. This cultivation technique should have originated from the Buddhist lineage, but it didn't seem like it. However, its power was already close to that of a magical power. At this time, although Chu Xiu had the upper hand, he actually couldn't do anything to Longshan. The other party was really talented. After bathing in dragon blood, his body was no different from a fierce beast. The power of the 6 paths of reincarnation unexpectedly couldn't completely wear down his strength. The primordial spirit attack in the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet was effective, but this guy was simply stubborn. Even if he was pulled into the 6 paths of reincarnation, it still couldn't destroy his state of mind. The collision of the primordial spirit alone couldn't destroy the other party's primordial spirit, which wasn't strong, but was extremely tough. For a moment, they were in a deadlock. Longshan clutched his head and howled miserably. If you have the ability, don't use those strange methods. Let's fight fair and square. An unfathomable smile appeared on Chu Xiu's face. All right, I'll satisfy you. As he spoke, Chu Xiu directly put away the 6 paths of Saha Samsara wheel. Longshan rubbed his head. After being thwarted twice, the anger in his eyes had already risen to the limit. Even his eyes were suffused with a blood-red color, but his pupils had become vertical like a snake, and his aura had soared by 30%. However, before he could make a move, Chu Xiu had already made his move. When the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth was executed, a gigantic figure that was thousands of feet tall emerged from the array. Compared to the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth, Longshan's small giant-like body was like a small rabbit. As the fist smashed down, Longshan roared angrily and also punched out. A powerful storm suddenly burst out, but Longshan actually took the punch head-on. When the second punch landed, Longshan was blasted back a few steps, but he forced himself not to retreat anymore. However, when the third punch, the fourth punch, the fifth punch, the entire area was covered by the storm of power. The array rumbled and directly exploded. The old barbarian king's complexion changed. As he waved his hands, rays of spiritual treasures scattered in all directions, and unexpectedly, the violent storm of power was completely smoothed out. Even the power of laws was smoothed out. When the storm dissipated, everyone could see the situation in the area. Chu Xiu had already put away the law phenomenon, and was standing on the same spot, but there was no trace of Longshan. Chapter 1332. Chu Xiu made Longshan disappear with 5 punches. This nearly scared He Jie and Lu Jadeite to death. They thought that Chu Xiu had turned Longshan into ashes. Longshan was the #1 warrior of the Luoshan tribe. Although he was a simple-minded person, he was loyal and devoted to the old barbarian king. He was definitely the old barbarian king's trusted aide. If Longshan died, none of them would be able to leave the Luoshan tribe today. However, their worries were unnecessary. Chu Xiu knew the severity of the situation. A fluctuation came from the ground. Longshan struggled to climb out from the ground. His face was covered in dirt, but judging from his appearance he was fine. Chu Xiu said indifferently, "This time you are convinced." Longshan said in a muffled voice, "Longshan is convinced." He was truly convinced, convinced from the bottom of his heart. This guy was very simple-minded. He felt that he was at a disadvantage when using weapons. He felt that Chu Xiu had an unfair advantage when using secret techniques. But now, Chu Xiu had completely defeated him in strength, which he was most proficient in. Thus he could not help but be convinced. Chu Xiu turned his gaze to the old barbarian king and asked, "Senior, is it okay this time?" The old barbarian king sighed. "Of course it's okay. You defeated Longshan. Among the chiefs of the surrounding tribes, almost no one can fight against you. I heard that although you are a martial immortal, your age is still among the younger generation in Jianghu. Talented people will appear in every generation. There are people like you in every generation among the humans, but there are only a handful of them in the history of the Berserkers. The old barbarian king turned around and said a few words to the chiefs of the surrounding tribes. Then he said to Chu Xiu, "You can bring your people over. However, remember to bring the people from the Black Luo tribe. Let them open the way. Otherwise, these guys will not recognize you." Chu Xiu cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, senior. Time waits for no man." After he finished speaking, Chu Xiu immediately went back to receive the main force. Although this trip to the south was somewhat different from what Chu Xiu imagined, the result was the same. Just as Chu Xiu was passing through the southern barbaric land, the entire western region was like a huge powder keg that was about to explode. The Sky Luo treasure Buddha gathered all the monks in the pavilions and gathered all the forces. They slowly advanced towards the Sanskrit sect. This move caught the Sanskrit sect off guard. In the center of the western part of the western region, where the Sanskrit hall was located, the pitch-black hall was engraved with all sorts of strange Sanskrit characters. There was not a single window in the hall, and the interior was filled with chaotic mist and radiance. In the north of the hall stood a huge statue. It had 3 heads and 8 arms, and its feet were on the ground while its head was in the sky. At the center was a boundless chaotic mist, and its face couldn't be seen clearly. It gave off an ancient and mysterious feeling. In the beginning, the Sanskrit sect was not a single entity. Instead, there were 3 opposing gods, and they fought and killed each other. However, in the later stages, a stunning existence appeared in the Sanskrit sect. He united the 3 gods and united the Sanskrit sect, which was on the verge of splitting up, into one. Only then did it become a large Buddhist sect that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Sky Luo treasure Buddha. The statue behind them was not the 3 gods of the Sanskrit sect. Instead, it was the supreme existence that they worshipped after the 3 gods united. It had no name, and was the creator of the entire world. At that moment, there were several dozen people gathered at the foot of the huge statue. They were the rulers of the 3 shrines of the Sanskrit sect, as well as the various divine palaces. Standing in the center was a white-haired middle-aged man. He wore a silver robe, and his white hair emitted a silver luster. It was combed meticulously by him. That middle-aged man was the current head of the Brahma Palace, Lunaga. He was an expert in the 8th level of martial immortal realm. Beside him stood a thin and withered old man in black clothing. That old man's eyes were extremely strange. One could not see his pupils. One was pitch black, as if filled with demonic aura, and the other was blood red, as if soaked in blood. That old man was the head of the Shiva Palace, Yan Mo. He was also in existence in the 8th level of martial immortal realm. After the head of the Sanskrit sect left, the entire Sanskrit sect was actually managed by the heads of the 3 shrines. But now that the Vishnu Palace no longer had a head, the Sanskrit sect was managed by the 3 of them. The Sky Luo treasure Buddha had already started to gather its forces and advance. It was clear that it wanted to fight against the Sanskrit sect. That made the people of the Sanskrit sect incomparably nervous. After all, in terms of power, the Sanskrit sect was inferior to the Sky Luo treasure Buddha. The heads of the various divine palaces were arguing and discussing. They belonged to the 3 shrines, and there was already some discord between them. In addition to the tense atmosphere, the people below were on the verge of fighting. "All of you shut up," Lunaga shouted in a low voice. The scene instantly became deathly silent. Can arguing make the people of the Sky Luo treasure Buddha retreat? Today, everyone gathered here is to think of a plan to deal with the Sky Luo treasure Buddha, not to argue. Yan Mo said in a hoarse voice. What plan is there to think of? Different situations call for different actions. Those bald donkeys want to take advantage of the Sanskrit sect's weakness. Then we'll turn them into dead bald donkeys. Yan Mo's words contained extreme murderous intent. It was as if there was a boundless sea of blood surging. Lunaga said in a low voice. Even so, there's still something wrong. The people of the Sky Luo treasure Buddha attacked too suddenly. They should know that the formation between the upper and lower realms can't hold for much longer. Who knows when it will completely shatter? At that time, the Daoyu Ocean will usher in a new era of great competition. Aren't they afraid of losing too much of their strength by attacking the Sanskrit sect at this time, causing them to be eliminated in this era of great competition? Previously, when the Sanskrit sect and the Sky Luo treasure Buddha were confronting each other, both sides had a tacit understanding. That was, they were in a stalemate. But now this tacit understanding was suddenly broken by the Sky Luo treasure Buddha. Yen Mo sneered. Those bald donkeys hate us to the core. What can't they do? But it doesn't matter. Since they want to attack, the Sanskrit sect will accompany them to the end. Lu Naga glanced at Yen Mo with a trace of dissatisfaction in his eyes. The people of the Shiva Palace were always like this. They didn't care about the big picture. They only knew how to fight and kill. Of course, in this situation, they had no other choice but to fight. Lu Naga said in a low voice, Yen Mo, your Shiva Palace is the strongest. This time, your Shiva Palace will be the first to go up. Do you have any objections? Yen Mo laughed strangely. Isn't it always like this? Don't worry, no one in the Shiva Palace is afraid of death. The warriors who die in battle will naturally go and meet the great god Shiva. Lu Naga's eyebrows twitched. Yen Mo's words seemed to imply that his people were afraid of death. Lu Naga snorted lightly. He didn't argue with Yen Mo at this time. He continued to instruct the other palaces. Finally, he said, the Vishnu Palace doesn't have a palace master. So in this battle, all of you will stay at the back. The Vishnu Palace contains all sorts of secret techniques and rare treasures that have been researched halfway. Those things cannot be damaged. Yen Mo nodded indifferently. He didn't have any objections. In any case, the Vishnu Palace was the weakest among them. Most of the time they wouldn't attack. After instructing everyone, Lu Naga suddenly turned his gaze to Yindala. Yindala, you don't have to fight in this battle. Stay at the back and guard the Vishnu Palace. Hearing that, Yindala was taken aback. Then he said with dissatisfaction, why should I guard the back? With my strength, am I only fit to guard the back? Almost everyone in the Shiva Palace loved to fight. Especially a madman like Yindala. In such a shocking battle, Lu Naga actually wanted him to guard the back. How could Yindala tolerate that? Lu Naga said in a low voice, it's because you're strong that I want you to guard the back. Yindala, don't think that you can stand shoulder to shoulder with a 7th layer martial immortal just because you've killed one. The characteristics of your techniques are suitable for one-on-one attacks. At that time, you can rely on the world annihilation flame that can tear apart any power of laws to unleash its greatest effect. But this time, the heavenly treasure Buddha has sent everyone to the battlefield. Our Sanskrit sect has done the same. In such an environment, once a chaotic battle begins, you will lose all your advantages. You might even be inferior to an ordinary 5th layer martial immortal. Right now, other than Anasiro, the old man, there isn't a single martial immortal in the Vishnu Palace. Letting you go is also to protect the Vishnu Palace, and also for the sake of the overall situation. Yindala was still a bit unconvinced. He couldn't help but turn his gaze to Yen Mo. After all, Yen Mo was his superior. He could be considered half a teacher to him. Half of what he had learned was taught by Yen Mo. Yen Mo's mind wasn't only filled with killing. He also knew what Lu Naga said was reasonable. Just do as Lu Naga said. If you want to attack, there will be plenty of opportunities. This time, you guarding the back is indeed more valuable than charging at the front. Hearing Yen Mo's words, Yindala could only nod in agreement. Lu Naga looked around and said in a deep voice, since that's the case, go back and gather the cultivators in your divine palaces. Prepare to fight the heavenly treasure Buddha. Even if our Sanskrit sect is at a disadvantage right now, when the heavenly treasure Buddha comes, we will leave a pile of bald heads behind. With that order, the Sanskrit sect that occupied half of the western region started to move. All the divine palaces and cultivators on the Sanskrit sect's side started to gather. When the heavenly treasure Buddha pushed the cultivators into the Sanskrit sect's territory, the cultivators on the Sanskrit sect's side also finished their preparations. When it came to a battle between two large sects of this level, there wasn't much that could be done, because both sides understood each other's strength too well. They could even accurately estimate the approximate number of people in each pavilion or divine palace. So in a situation like that, all methods were useless. In the end, they could only use all their strength. What they were competing on was the fundamental strength of both sides. In fact, in the past 10,000 years, both sides had fought this kind of battle many times. Although there were wins and losses every time, they had never been able to completely destroy the other side. The Sanskrit sect thought that the result this time would be the same. But they didn't expect that the heavenly treasure Buddha, who never liked to use tricks and schemes, would give them a different surprise this time. Chapter 1333. At the border between the Sanskrit sect and the Sky Luo Temple stood a huge statue. On one side was the Buddha, and on the other was the god of creation. Within a few miles between the two statues, there was no one, nor were there any forces. The entire western domain was completely divided by these two statues. At this time, the Sanskrit sect and the Sky Luo Temple's warriors were spread out under the huge statues. Buddhist light and Sanskrit words shot into the sky, and a powerful aura stirred up the heavens and earth. Earth, wind, water, fire, and all sorts of other powers intertwined in the sky. The laws of heaven and earth had been completely changed. Ranaja looked at the Sky Luo Temple's warriors and sneered. Your Sky Luo Temple really hates the Sanskrit sect to the bone. The upper and lower realms are about to connect, and the Daoyuotian Empire is in turmoil. The era of great competition is upon us, and destiny has changed. Your Sky Luo Temple should be able to sense this. But in this era of great competition, you dare to attack the Sanskrit sect first. Aren't you afraid of being eliminated? Zen Master Jishan put his palms together and chanted. Demons and heretics, not only do I hate them to the bone, but I also want to get rid of them. In this era of great competition, no matter who is in charge of the pugilistic world, we can't let you demons and heretics be in charge. Ranaja picked his ear and said calmly, heretics? Are those who are different from your Sky Luo Temple heretics? What a detestable title. But how many times has the Sky Luo Temple tried to get rid of us heretics in the past 10,000 years? Did you succeed even once? This time, it still won't work. As Ranaja spoke, he formed a seal with his hands. Boundless laws of power twisted around him. Finally, the power of the laws began to fuse behind him, evolving into boundless chaos. The primordial power of chaos before the heavens and earth were formed. Next to Ranaja, Yama was surrounded by blood-red Sanskrit words, wrapping him up like a huge blood cocoon. But as the blood cocoon was torn apart, the person who walked out was not the stooped old man. Instead, it was a tall young man dressed in blood-red armor. His looks were so devilishly handsome that they didn't resemble Yama in the slightest. The only similarity between the two was their eyes. One was black, while the other was blood-red. Yama stepped on the boundless sea of blood and held a huge bow in his hand. It was a huge bow that was completely condensed from world-destroying flames. However, the arrow on the giant bow was not the apocalyptic fire. Instead, it was an extremely evil arrow formed by countless vengeful spirits and evil spirits. Everyone on the Sky Luo Temple's side also made their move. Zen Master Jishan chanted the name of Buddha, and the pure lotus Buddha's aura was unleashed by him to the extreme. The dazzling Buddha's aura covered the sky, and golden lotuses bloomed within it. 3 Buddha shadows appeared behind the chief monk of Huayan Pavilion. The past, the future, and the present disrupted time and space. The Vajra Institution's president held the Vajra exorcism wand in his hand and unleashed his indestructible golden body. His entire body was shrouded in countless dazzling golden Sanskrit characters as he rushed out first. Both sides used all their means. Without the slightest probing, they attacked with all their strength. While they were fighting fiercely, Chu Xiu and others came out of the dense forest of innumerable huge mountains. It took longer than Chu Xiu had expected. After all, when Chu Xiu left, he was alone. But this time, he brought tens of thousands of elites of the Kunlun devil cult. Although these people weren't weak, they definitely couldn't compare to Chu Xiu. So their speed was immediately slowed down. Chu Xiu looked up at the sky in the distance. Even though he was thousands of miles away, he could still feel the strong power coming from there. Looking back at the others behind him, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Let's go. The Sky Luo Temple's side has already made its move. We should not waste time here." At this time, In Vishnu Palace, almost all the palaces belonging to Vishnu Palace were gathered here. In fact, although the strength of Vishnu Palace was not as strong as Brahma Palace and Shiva Palace, it was not weak. For example, the Illusion Heavenly Palace and the Solar Palace controlled by Singalo were also not weak. However, most of the disciples of Vishnu Palace were in charge of studying all kinds of strange objects and secret techniques, or things like medicinal pills and formations. It would be a waste to let them fight with the people of Tianluo Busha, just like how Tianluo Busha would not let the disciples of Medicine King Pavilion go to the battlefield. At this time, Yandala stayed in Vishnu Palace with a face full of annoyance. For people like him who liked to fight, in this life, it was estimated that he could only encounter such a big battle between two factions. The result was that he could not participate, which made Yandala feel very aggrieved. On the other side, an old man wearing a golden robe with lotus flowers helplessly shook his head and said, "Yandala, don't go around. It is good that you can stay here. If even my Vishnu Palace has to send all of its members to the battlefield, it will be the crucial moment of the Sanskrit's life and death." This old man was the only martial immortal left in Vishnu Palace, Anasiro, the palace master of the Lotus Divine Palace. He was already close to 500 years old. He was already very old. His cultivation of the third sky of martial immortal was completely passed by time. So, although he was a martial immortal, he had never competed for the position of the Lord of Vishnu Palace. That position would only be left for the strong or young warriors like Singalo. Yandala coldly snorted and said, "Boring, really boring." For so many years, the Sanskrit's been passively attacked the most. Why do we always have to wait for the opponent to attack first before we can counterattack? Anasiro smiled and said, "I am old, I don't have as much spirit as you young people. At that time, I also had the same thought as you. I wanted to kill all those damn bald donkeys of the Heavenly Jewel Temple. But it's a pity that those things are just thoughts. If we attack first, we will die even more miserably. This time, the sect master and the revered one of the world are not here. In my opinion, they won't be able to do anything. At most, both sides will be injured. Anyway, if we attack first or not, both sides will be injured. What's the difference?" Just as Yandala wanted to say something, the entire Vishnu Palace suddenly made a violent shaking sound. The formation outside immediately started to activate. A disciple of the Vishnu Palace ran in panic and reported, "Not good. Someone is attacking the Vishnu Palace." Anasiro's complexion immediately changed. Impossible. All the forces of the Heavenly Jewel Temple are attacking in the battlefield. How can they divide their forces to attack the Vishnu Palace? If they wanted to attack the Vishnu Palace, the Heavenly Jewel Temple could only take out the power of the Transformation Pavilion, or several other pavilions united together. But with their understanding of the Heavenly Jewel Temple, it was absolutely impossible for the Heavenly Jewel Temple to cultivate such a strong force without them knowing. It's not the Heavenly Jewel Temple. It's the Eastern region's Chu Xiao. Hearing this, Anasiro was suddenly stunned. Chu Xiao? Who was that? Anasiro was basically in a state of retirement in the Vishnu Palace. So there were some things that he did not care about. The only time he heard the name Chu Xiao was when Singalo was killed. At this time, he only felt that the name Chu Xiao was somewhat familiar, but he did not think that it was that Chu Xiao. Yandala's face revealed a cold smile. Chu Xiao? Just in time. Previously, he was still complaining that this time he did not have the chance to attack. He did not expect that in an instant, the chance to attack had already come. Last time when he fought with Chu Xiao, he did not actually lose. He was just suppressed, so he was very unwilling to fight. At first, because he did not understand Chu Xiao's martial Tao, he was directly suppressed by the opponent's divine ability. But after he adapted to Chu Xiao's fighting style, he actually had the confidence to reverse the situation. But Mu Baishuang and the others could not bear the pressure of the soaring Heaven Wuji seal and left first. He had no choice but to leave. Otherwise, he would have to face the attack of the High Heaven sect people. This time Chu Xiao actually dared to come to his door. Whether he took advantage of the battle between the two sects to loot the burning house or colluded with the bald donkeys of the Heavenly Jewel Temple, he would not let him return. At this time, outside the Vishnu Palace, tens of thousands of elites of the Kunlun devil cult had lined up and were ready to attack the Vishnu Palace in a uniform manner. The power of the spirit array at the headquarters of the Vishnu Palace was not weak. Therefore, in the front row, Grandmaster Yuanji and Chao Shen were commanding a group of cultivators to break the spirit array, causing the entire Vishnu Palace to shake under the roar of the spirit array. Behind them were the real elites under Chu Xiu, such as Tangya. When the spirit array was broken, they would be the first to rush out. Over the years, they had been following Chu Xiu through endless battles and battles. Later on, they had also been cultivating in the celestial absolute plane. Due to that, their strength had skyrocketed. They were no weaker than the disciples of the top sects in the celestial absolute plane. In fact, they were even stronger than them. After all, in the 4 regions of the north, south, east, and west, there were no cultivators like them who had such strong fighting experience. Lu Jiang he stood behind Chu Xiu and suddenly had a feeling of sadness. The war drums thundered, the banners fluttered, and the murderous aura rushed to the sky. This scene was not like the scene when the cult leader led them to attack Jianghu. However, the Kunlun devil cult was still the Kunlun devil cult, but the cult leader was not the cult leader anymore. At this time, Yandala had already walked out with his people. Seeing Chu Xiu in front of him, Yandala's eyes revealed a strong murderous intention. Chu Xiu, have you come to die? Everyone says that you, Chu Xiu, are a smart person. But today, no matter if you've joined forces with the Heavennet Treasure Rakshasa or acted on your own, you've undoubtedly taken a bad move, and this move is sufficient to cause you to die a graveless death. You probably did not expect that I would also be here, right? Chu Xiu's eyes revealed a strange look. Indeed, I did not expect it, but it doesn't matter. Destroying the Vishnu Palace and getting a deputy of the Shiva Palace, it is also a profit. Without waiting for Yandala to say anything, Chu Xiu shouted, "Kill!" You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.